I remember after graduating from seminary talking to one of my friends on the phone because there was a woman in one of the churches, one of the small town churches I was serving right after seminary that was going around telling everybody that at that time I identified as Judy because that was my...
There's always some person who does this anyway.
Yeah, my nickname, because my full birth name is Judith Ann Ramsey, but went by Judy. Started my transitioning of who I was by changing the spelling of Judy, because it always been Judy, and I'm like, Judy doesn't really fit me. So then I would do Judee.
Okay.
So it worked because it was. I see that as part still kind of claiming again another little chunk of or little piece of who I am. And so there was that woman, like you said, that
or
saying,
it can be a guy too, but it's always somebody, some little nosy bugger.
Yeah. And so she was like, Pastor Judy, I know she's a lesbian.
Oh no.
Oh. And so I was talking to my friend on the phone, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? So and so said Pastor Judy's a lesbian. And I'm like, you know what? I think I am.
You got me. You got me.
Unfortunately, that, I think, ruined my relationship with that friend. But...
Well, not a friend, though. I mean...
Yeah, that's a whole different issue with them.
The whole gossipy thing. And,
But that was really the first time I think I'd ever really verbalized who I was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To somebody other than myself. I had never ever said that to another friend or another person. And I think that was partially because it was on the phone. This friend happened to had come from Arizona, so I knew that she had been exposed to things that I'd never been exposed to. I had always talked to her. She seemed pretty open. Evidently it wasn't as open as I was thinking, but again, that was like that another little snippet of who.
So do you think maybe she was just confirming that you were that, or she was continuing with like a gossipy kind of thing?
Well, I think the woman in the church was probably just gossiping about it.
Yeah.
My friend didn't, as I remember the conversation, which could be totally wrong, never really was like, oh, maybe you should go talk to somebody about that, or are you sure? Or
nothing supportive.
Yeah, she didn't respond either negatively or supportive, either one. So I just kind of left that alone, and that friendship just didn't exist kind of after that phone call.
Yeah.
And so, but then that thought kept coming to me, and even I kept having those thoughts even in seminary. And there was a woman that I was friends with that I kept thinking, I think she's
a
lesbian. Maybe I could talk to her about how she lives in that uncomfortableness of being who you are, and yet the church not accepting who you are.
And being so blatant about it. I mean, it's right in the rules. Yeah.
And I never had the courage to talk to that other person because I kept thinking, okay, if she's not and she's not accepting, then what happens?
Or also you could be invading her privacy. Some people are very, very private, especially if it involves their vocation.
Yeah.
And it's hard to navigate.
Yeah. And so, not knowing who to talk to, what to do, at that time I did start seeing a therapist because, that tension is just like, okay, how do I do this? How do I live in the church? How do I live who I am authentically? And
did you ever go for like some sort of like pastoral counseling, or you just kind of skipped over that?
I mainly went with like a
secular
therapist. Secular therapist, a psychologist.
So you just wanted kind of an outside perspective?
Yeah. Okay. Although she was she never brought faith into our discussions or anything like that, but I think the feeling I always got, she was very faith-based.
Okay.
So she had an understanding of Scripture. She had a very...
So she was coming from that place in a good way.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
motivated her, but she didn't bring it into the actual work.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so, you know, kept exploring that, lived in that tension, kept thinking, okay, the church is going to change. I know it hasn't changed for hundreds of years, but by golly, it's going to change.
You're so hopeful. You're so hopeful. Well, it's hard too, because you did a lot of growth.
Yeah.
So you're hopeful that the organization, the spiritual organization that you are involved with, would also go through that.
Right. Yeah.
So I can see that. I can see that. And wouldn't that be great if they all did that? Wouldn't that be great if they all did that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was in 1996, there was another general conference. And that was the time when the Reconciling United Methodist Organization kind of started its grassroots effort. And what that is, the way I see it, it's trying, the way I define it in my head, and it may be totally different than the way they define it, probably is. I see them reconciling the harm that the church has done to the gay community with the real teachings of the Bible, and saying, okay, we're going to reconcile this all together, and we're going to be able to live together, and we're going to accept everybody, and yes, we're going to fully embrace even our gay and lesbian pastors.
So this became like a movement.
Yeah, which is still part of the United Methodist Church today.
What specifically is that movement called?
It's called the Reconciling Congregations.
Okay, great.
And so there were congregations here, there, and everywhere around the United States. And and I believe the headquarters were in Chicago. And I believe that is still an organization out of Chicago.
Great.
And
Chicago is such a hotbed of really cool activism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would have meetings around the country, and I met a couple friends out of a church in Wichita that became a reconciling congregation, which was one of the first ones in Kansas.
Oh. So they changed to becoming that.
Wow. They actually, and what happens is they change the mission statement and everything like that. Great. And so they live out that part of the faith that okay, if you identify as the part of this community, we welcome you without any restrictions. You can be part of our congregation. And so I met them, and we went around. We went to Atlanta. We went down to Dallas to these reconciling congregation.
So it sounds like you're kind of becoming an activist in a way.
Yeah. And so that was part of, okay, I'm going to stay in the church.
Was this still when you were in seminary or afterwards?
This was after I had graduated from my first congregation. I graduated. I went to my first two congregations outside after I had graduated. Then I moved from those two congregations to two new congregations. And so it was in those two congregations where I became active in the reconciling congregation movement.
Okay. Let's take a break for a second. All right, so we took a little break, and I looked at your garden, and it's so lovely, and I'm very envious.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I inherited from my mom. She loved to garden, and so that's...
my dad did too. It's one of the few things that I felt connected with him about.
Yeah, and we were talking about that some of the rocks in the water feature that I'm building are from my farm, from my mom and dad's farm.
It's limestone, and it's very fossiliferous, huge fossils in it.
And so that and the gardening kind of keep me in touch with my
Yeah.
roots.
Yeah. I noticed that there were some beautiful irises out front too.
Yeah, yeah, and that happens to be my favorite flower. I used to try to grow hollyhocks because my mom told me once that hollyhock was her favorite flower.
Oh, okay.
And
that's sweet.
My grandma also, growing up, she had a storm shelter, a storm cellar that.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We're in Tornado Alley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she would grow hollyhocks on the storm cellar.
Oh, on top of it.
Yeah, on top of it.
Oh,
and
it was
so,
subterranean.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So, connecting with my grandma and my mom, I tried to grow hollyhocks. I was never successful at hollyhocks for some reason.
Okay.
But I can.
Maybe you have like a little microclimate that it just doesn't work well, or something in the soil.
Yeah. I think it's because maybe it doesn't like clay soil.
Okay.
So I think it has to have that broken up soil.
Okay.
So, and
it looks pretty good to me. I mean, all throughout the Midwest, I'm like, wow, look at this soil. I mean, that I used to be a geologist, and I wasn't like a soil expert or anything, but also being a gardener, like the nexus of these two things, I'm just like, oh, look at this. So rich out here.
Those are, I think, that and the other gardening, because I grow tomatoes as well.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, they're over on the south side of our house.
Okay.
And then my mom grew tomatoes. So growing up on a farm, growing tomatoes, growing flowers, kind of keeps me connected back to my roots at my farm.
As a farmer. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are those moments that keep me connected with my history, because even though my history doesn't always have some of the best parts of it, there are those parts that you always want to embrace, and that is one of those parts of my history that I want to embrace.
Right.
And yeah,
it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because like I was talking about just very briefly about my grandfather, like there's some things about him that I hate, actually, that he was racist, but then there's some parts that I just adore about him. Like he was a vet, and he was, of course, in World War II, like many of his many of the men in his generation, and he took care of his family really well, And so there's some things about him that are absolutely lovely. So it's really complex.
Yeah. And there was I think it was the time when I was finally shifting away from. It kind of started happening back in 1996. One is or 94.
Right, that was during that conference time.
Yeah, that, and it was also the time when I was finally going back to therapy, or when I was going to therapy and all that other work that I was doing. Is when the shift finally became in my head. Those were my parents back then. These are my parents now. This is the way I experienced my parents now as an adult.
Right.
Those were the way I experienced my parents as a kid, which they did the best they could, which is sometimes just a cop-out, but that's the way they did. That's who they are.
And they're also part of their time and place as well.
Yeah. And
although that's never an excuse for not growing.
Yeah. But I can leave that in the past, and I can build a brand new relationship from this point forward with my mom and my dad. And that's what I did.
Yeah, that's great.
And
you were able to.
Yeah.
Some people are not able to.
So
did they change as well?
My mom changed dramatically.
Great.
Part of it was the fact that back in 1994, my brother had been diagnosed with AIDS. We had talked about the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
Back in 91, 92, he'd been diagnosed with AIDS. I didn't know it. My sister knew it sooner because she was much more open.
And that was before the good drug cocktails came out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so my last semester of seminary, he came to live with me. I was living in Kansas City at the time, or in Olathe, and he came to live with me because he didn't want to go back to live with mom and dad, because he knew, one, the healthcare wouldn't be good, and two, they wouldn't know how to support him.
Right. I knew, I was a teenager at the time, and I knew some gay boys who had HIV, and some of them went on to develop AIDS, and sometimes they had to go home to parents that didn't accept them.
Yeah.
And it was just so tragic.
Yeah.
So
I felt honored that my brother trusted me enough to want to live with me.
Right, yeah.
And know that I was going to provide him with a loving, supporting home.
Yeah.
And so...
And I got to say, just as a side note, that happened a lot between lesbians and men who had HIV/AIDS at the time, is that lesbians became caregivers.
Yeah.
Just community-wide.
Yeah.
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 So, and he came and lived with me. He eventually passed away. My sister got married in January of the year.
Okay.
Of that year. My brother passed away in July of that year.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the beginning of a shift in my mom. Because to lose a child, which I had never have,
right.
but have heard enough stories that how impactful that is on a parent. Yeah. And I think that loss propelled her into maybe opening her mind a little bit, but maybe understanding that she needed to be a little bit more loving.
Right.
I built a good relationship with her. Yeah. I built a good relationship with her. She still had kind of an awful relationship with my sister, but that's my sister and my mom. Sure. I won't go there.
You can only do so much work.
Yeah. But my dad eventually passed away 6 years before my mom. So I was there for my mom, and traveled through that whole entire time with her in that history. And so that brought us even closer. And so it was in the shift of losing my brother and then, kind of finally fully embracing who I am, leaving the church.
And being strong in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was finally the compelling thing is, okay, the church is not changing. I don't see the church changing. I can't live within this paradox anymore. I need to find something that's going to make me healthy and happy.
Right.
Even though it wasn't going to make me fully happy,
Sure.
It was going to make me happier. So that meant leaving the church, leaving everything that I knew. This gets way back to when we first started. That's how I got into working with kids because
education.
The ministry in the church that was most fulfilling to me was working with the kids.
Nice.
And so I'm like...
it's not that different.
Right.
Really.
So I'm like, okay, I love working with kids. What out in the secular society works with kids, but in a school.
Yeah.
So I came and became a para here in the Kansas City area, which is somebody who supports teachers in the classroom.
So it's not like a substitute. It's an aid to the teacher.
Yeah, it's an aid to a teacher.
Okay.
So I did that in what we call a life skills class. So that's with the kids with multiple disabilities.
Yeah.
And so,
bless you for doing that. I know that's difficult work.
Yeah. I walked into that classroom. I felt like I remember walking in going, God, why did you send me here? I can't do this.
Sent the right person. God sent the right person.
But after going in and the kids are like, and they were loving, they were caring. They didn't care that I was this complete stranger off the street. They loved me. And
I gotta say, all the people I know who do that work, who work with disabled kids as a paraeducator, they're all just so amazing. Like they deal with kids in a way that is just empowering to them, meets them where they're at, celebrates them. And helps them with things they might have trouble with, and I'm just always so impressed with them. It takes a special person to do that. Yeah.
So that they loved me, and I went away from.
Of course they did.
Of course. I went away from that, and I'm like, went to the principal, and I'm like, okay, I think I'll take the job. I went back to the human resource person. He said, well, do you like that job? I do have another one over here.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I think this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so I spent 3 years in that classroom, ended up moving then to the kids who had more behavior disorders. Love those kids because the first teacher I started working with was like, they always tell you are what you teach, and I'm like, well, I think I'm here because I'm a behavior disordered kid at heart. I really want to be a rebel. And so again, that was fantastic. I ended up being a para for 16 years. Decided, okay, I want more than being a para. I want to have control of my own classroom. So that's how I made the journey from being a para to a teacher.
It's good that you got that baseline experience, though, assisting, because then you could work some things out for yourself. Yeah.
Right. And so within that whole journey and everything is where I met my spouse. My mother-in-law worked at the school that I started at. And so her mom worked there.
Were you set up?
No, not really. She came over to get some stuff from the first teacher I worked with, and I'm like, I think, does she know her daughter's gay? And so then we started going to athletic events, and so it just kind of
just as colleagues.
yeah, kind of common things, and so that kind of moved on from there.
Okay. And you said that you identify as straight, and I'm going to say that's a little bit different than most of the trans men that I have interviewed. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think everybody assumes that trans men are connected to the queer community, and that's not always the case after transitioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when that language was, I knew I was a lesbian, but then even as claiming that word for myself didn't fit. So, living in a relationship with another female, it feels good, but it doesn't still feel right.
Yeah.
So then that was when I finally thought, okay, this really isn't who I am. I would prefer to stand up when I urinate. I prefer to have intercourse as like heterosexual people would.
Sure.
I don't like sex between women the way it has to happen because of the organs that we are born with. And so that became part of that transitioning of,
and these are all your personal preferences. It's not a judgment.
No. I never, sexuality is so fluid.
Yes.
So just exploring, knowing that sexuality is fluid for myself and embracing that and beginning to understand that. That's why I embrace. And, there was a time when I would even consider myself somewhat transphobic because and even,
please go on with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, just being,
and this was when you identified as a lesbian,
right?
Somewhat? Okay.
Yeah. And also being, I don't even know what you would call it, biphobic.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
Because
it's very common.
Yeah. Because
common.
even in the gay community, you should pick a partner.
Right.
And you can't change your gender. What are you talking about? You're born this way or you're born that way. And even,
and you're really a lesbian. And, you shouldn't have an attraction to other kinds of people,
right,
only women.
Right,
and,
right. Yeah. And so there's, it, and, and to me what that shows is no matter what age you are, no matter what stage of life you are, even in your own body, you're growing and learning and... life evolves and you evolve and,
And just like we were talking about earlier, you can get over your own prejudices. Some of those prejudices are they're imposed on you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so getting rid of them is revelatory.
Yeah. And so that, finally beginning that journey of, okay... And it is even still within the trans community, there's the thought of, well, you have to pick a gender to be with.
Right.
You cannot be gender fluid. You're either straight or you're gay, and there's no mixing.
Right.
And
it used to be even more strongly like that.
Yeah.
I think it still lingers though, even though we've opened things up a bit, and there are non-binary people out there who are very, open about that.
Yeah.
even with that, I think some of that still does linger.
Yeah.
I certainly get that.
Yeah.
Even in this project, I have had people sort of read me like, oh, you're not masculine enough in this way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
my voice, or which I don't mind my voice at all. I love my voice, actually. It's
Yeah.
a great singing voice.
Yeah.
I like that it's a little bit soft. It's okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe if I move my hand too much or something.
Yeah.
You know, I've had people point that out, and I'm like, who are you to say that to
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
You know, it's hurtful.
Yeah. Well, and that even gets back to the how trans are you? Well, you don't want surgeries. Well, that
right.
makes you not trans.
Right, right.
You
Or
know.
maybe you can't afford it.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
live in this horrible capitalistic society.
Yeah.
You know?
And so there's even within your own mind, you have to come up with the realization and a growth of trans means so many different things.
Right.
You don't have to be on hormones
Right.
to be trans.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you identify as trans, you're trans.
Right.
If you
And there's so many trans identities out there.
Right. Right.
That's why they keep coming up with all this new language, because there's a lot of
Right.
variety.
Right. And so that, that even in my beginnings of my transition, I had those thoughts of, well, in order to be fully trans, okay, I'm going to have this surgery. I'm going to have that surgery. I'm going to have to make sure I have
What
that
time
hormone.
period was this, by the way?
This is like within...
Like the early 2000s, or?
Yeah, this has just like been within, because my transition actually, I started thinking about it, of course, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And even, I would say even living as a pastor in the church, my dress was androgynous.
Okay.
And would be considered more on the masculine side,
Sure.
which of course was taboo in the church, because, you're supposed to fit the feminine role in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so living that masculine life and having that identity of thinking, okay, I really think I am a guy, but you can't really be a guy because you're not born a guy. And so all that transitioning thinking in your head, plus then it becomes a more internal thing of, okay, yes, I finally recognize this. And it was probably about the time even when things started crystallizing a little bit more was probably when I began to be in a relationship with my wife. And so that was back in 2000. And
Was that due to a level of acceptance, like a deeper level?
I think it was because I finally had found at least one other person who, accepted me for who I was as a lesbian. She loved me for who I was as a lesbian. Well, okay, if she loves me as a lesbian, what else will she still love me as I change, as we grow together, as we date, as whatever our relationship blossoms into? And so I found that comfortableness. I also found a community here in the Kansas City area where there were people who were more like us, and I could...
When was that?
This was back in, 2001,
Okay.
2002,
Okay.
when I moved up here. And so we started dating in 2002 and kind of been together ever since then. This is 2023, so for 21 years.
Yeah. I love
so-
hearing that you went so deep. You know? Yeah. So much trust there, and so much hope for growth. That's just lovely.
And so, it hasn't always been, any relationships, not always
Right.
roses
Flowers
and peaches.
and yeah, of course.
But there's some
course.
prickly thorns and everything. But, we seem to have navigated life, at least to this point, together.
Right.
And so...
I was wondering, you just brought up, peer support in the early 2000s. What's your relationship with that kind of community now?
It's not as strong. I do have, through my present therapist and my spouse's former therapist, we were able to make connection with a very well known in the Kansas City area trans lawyer, Madeline Johnson.
Okay.
And so that was kind of the first experience I've ever had personally with working with a trans woman.
Okay.
And so that kind of helped.
There is a little bit of a separation
Yeah.
between the communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that kind of helped me with at least beginning to think, okay, there's got to be some sort of a community here. Unfortunately.
Oh, so you hadn't really met a lot of people?
No.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, the main community here in Kansas City happens to be like there's lots of gay and lesbian bars.
Okay.
And so when you're in your later 40s, 50s, bars aren't your
Right.
scene.
Right.
So,
especially if you're married and
Yeah.
you have a demanding job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so it is a little bit more difficult to find community. And so
And you're kind of, I would think, at a phase in your life where maybe a peer support group is maybe less helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe you're
Yeah.
somebody who could give back to a group like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're very experienced.
yeah.
But, you know, you're not somebody coming in fresh and wanting information.
Yeah. And I think that support area is where I support the students at my school, no matter who they
Through
are.
the GSA.
Through the GSA,
Yes.
but also just through, you know, my relationships with my students in my classroom. And that's the way I give back to my community now, I think, is by supporting not only the students in the GSA, but also just all students.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so,
Right.
you know, because they, in today's society.
Because you're part of the greater community as
Right.
well. You're not
Right.
just part of the LGBT community or the
Right.
trans
Right.
specific community. You're part of
Right.
the greater community.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, you know, Kansas just passed that archaic bathroom bill.
Right.
Where you have to go to the bathroom of your birth gender. And so, you know, people are going, okay, I was born a boy, but now I'm identifying as a girl, but I'm not comfortable going into a boy's bathroom because everything I have is now a girl.
Right. And it reinforces this idea that you have to be a trans person, you have to pass.
Yeah.
Which is not true.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
not true.
Yeah.
There are plenty of trans people for whom passing is not a goal.
Yeah.
For one thing.
Yeah.
And what is passing anyway?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's concretizing what a man and a woman is.
Right.
Which is wrong in the first
Right.
place because
Yeah.
there's so much variety
Right.
even among cisgendered people.
Yeah. Which, you know, when I look at, you know, even back to my parents, that the stereotypical, okay, this is the man's job, this is the woman's
Right.
job, and okay, even though my parents blurred that line a heck of a lot, there was still very much mom did the housework, dad did the farming, the real heavy farming work, like going out and baling hay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there was still that very defined. And now, you know, people don't do that anymore. It's like, okay,
You don't think
it's
so?
well, I'm sure there's places out there that still do that.
I think so.
But you know, I think as society has evolved, the people that, I don't even want to say more enlightened, but the people who feel most comfortable with exploring and blurring the lines of gender are those people that never see, oh, this is a man's job and this is a woman's job, and okay, this in our house is going to be your job, because even I think in Wendy and my relationship when we were first together, there was that very much idea
Careful about the table.
of female and male roles. So
Oh, really?
yeah, it's like, okay, this is the thing that is more female defined.
Did you both bring that to the relationship?
Um,
Like, were you very narrowly defined in terms of being a man? Like, you had an idea of what that was and tried to match it, and she was kind of doing the same thing?
I think I wanted the lines blurred a lot more than she did,
Okay.
but maybe that was just my own conception.
Okay.
But you know, when it came, because she doesn't cook, so
Okay.
I always did the cooking. And so, well, you know, the man's job is to mow the yard and to take out the trash.
Okay.
So that's what she would do.
Okay.
And so, I don't, she may not look at it that way, but that's the way, at least perceptually in my head, it fell out. But now when I look at it,
did you have to work that out a little bit?
Yeah. Because now, she still doesn't cook, but that's just because she doesn't cook.
Yeah, sure. I found when I also went through a stage of my life when I was lesbian or a dyke. I called myself a dyke. And I found that sometimes that sort of essentialism around gender also was in that community.
Yeah.
Right? There were the more butch or masculine type women and the more feminine type women. And they would definitely try to adhere to those rules. And it was pretty strict.
Yeah.
So it was interesting becoming a man. I felt actually I was breaking out of that.
Yeah.
In a strange way.
Yeah.
But I felt more actualized as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel more, I don't know if you experience it this way, but I know that some of the women I talk to are like, wow, it's so nice to talk to a guy that understands that.
Sure.
Because it's like, that's my experience for 50 some years.
Sure.
I lived your life for 50 some years, and so now I might have always had this other philosophy or thought of living as a guy, but I am still essentially the same person, blended together, but now living my full authentic life as a guy.
Right. You've had really a variety of experiences that other men are not going to have.
Yeah.
Probably.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
unless they were, raised by some lesbian feminists or something, which I do know some cisgendered guys who have been raised that way, and they're definitely different than their peers. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see and it's kind of nice to they always talk about being portrayed in the media, and finally being able to see, at least to some degree, different varieties of people in advertising. The black community talks about not ever having representation of black people in commercials.
Right.
Well, for the longest time, there haven't been gay people in commercials. And now you're finally seeing some companies being risky enough to do that. Yeah. And,
there's quite a backlash, too, as well.
Yeah. And definitely with Dylan Mulvaney and the backlash that she and her corporations have received for the transphobes out there doing that.
Yeah,
so,
that situation's a little bit strange.
Yeah.
So what do you have planned for your future? It seems like, I got to say, I'm quite envious of your lifestyle here. This is a sweet little house. You have all these pets, and it's very comfortable. You have pictures everywhere and little cute things and a well-used kitchen and a beautiful garden that you're constantly working on, which would be me as well. So I'm a little bit envious. And you seem very comfortable in your life and your job and your relationships. What's next for you? What else are you doing? What are you planning for?
Well, that is, it's kind of complicated. I think part of it is the fact that with all the Kansas City did become a sanctuary community.
I just heard about
city
that. Yeah.
For transgendered care.
Right. So they're ignoring the state, basically.
Right.
Awesome.
So at least we have leadership here in the Kansas City area that is supportive of all rights.
Right. Supportive of all of its population.
Right.
Yes.
And so that feels like Kansas City is somewhat of a refuge, but still there is still that prevalent thinking that even though the leadership has said that, you can still feel like the undertones and experiences the things in public that are against what the city council has put in place.
So have you noticed things like here in the city that have changed a little bit, or events feel a little bit different?
It feels like the gay pride events are going to happen June 9th, 10th, and 11th here in Kansas City.
In a couple weeks.
Yeah. And so that feels like it could be kind of I don't know. I think it feels like it could be, to me, and maybe this is just some internal strife, feels like a tenuous time.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we have the legislature saying this, and we have in Missouri, we have the legislature in Kansas saying this. And so
has it been the case that far right neo-Nazi types have shown up to events here in the state?
They have. They have.
So that's a very real fear there.
There have been protests down. Lots of people go down to J.C. Nichols Plaza, down on our what's called Country Club Plaza, which is kind of the ritzy glitzy part of Kansas City, and so that's where they hold their protests. And they've had protests supporting trans rights, that trans lives matter, and then there's been counter protests around them. So there feels like there is that I feel like there's a little cauldron here in Kansas City. And the tension is real everywhere, I'm sure in the United States, but being here, I feel it. So
just recently, a city in Florida canceled their pride events. Do you think that's possible here?
I don't see that happening. I do know that there was a legislative bill put forward in our legislature to classify drag shows as adult entertainment. And so I think had that bill passed, which luckily it did not, and the governor didn't say you have to pass it or I'm going to hold you hostage, that seems to maybe have lessened some of that tension. Because there is, we do have a Hamburger Mary's here in Kansas City, which is a well-known franchised gay place, drag shows around the United States. And so,
you said that there's a lot of gay and lesbian bars here.
And so that feels like at least that part of the population is protected for now. And yet there's still that tension of, okay, it's just for now. When is that next shoe gonna fall?
Because when they do this incrementally, they take a little bit here, a little bit there, and they just feel so bold. I mean, the things that they're doing right now, I thought we were making progress. Right, because we were for a while. And now we've gone so backward. It's frightening.
Well, and that's, people will say, well, the Attorney General put his executive order out and it was so drastic, because then when people saw that the legislature just was banning trans kids, well, that doesn't affect the adults. But it was the underhanded move to get the...
Well, that's what they do, right? And they always use children as this pawn, right? And it's the state actually punishing children and parents. I mean, that's what people aren't understanding, is this is really punishing children.
And, living with enough of that age of a population every year and in and out, they're so mixed up about themselves in a variety of ways. Just trying to make it through life, most of them. Trying to make it to high school, because I work with 8th graders, moving into freshmen as high school. They just wanting to make it to the next year and survive. And get out of high school. And
then to have to deal with state oppression.
It's
really intense.
And so my future, I think, I don't feel... I used to feel welcome in Kansas City to a degree.
It's a great city.
Yeah.
I've been driving around a lot, and I'm really impressed by it.
I really do like Kansas City. It's got, as any city, it's got its things that you don't like and things that you do like.
It's very vibrant here, though.
Yeah.
Like the music culture and all the restaurants. And it's not all shishi either. It's like, people like us can go out and do things.
Right.
We don't have to be rich to do it. Yeah.
Right. And, I felt even, when I was identifying as a lesbian, my wife and I would go out in public. We would hold hands. We would go and we'd go sit in a restaurant, and we would sit beside each other in a restaurant, and I would feel totally normal and feel totally comfortable. Now to do that, it feels scary. Because of just the climate of our country.
Yeah. So even though you're married, and you're in a heterosexual relationship, and you pass as a trans person, and you're older and you're established, even you feel somewhat afraid.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Just afraid of, okay, even though I've been on hormone treatment in October, it will be 3 years, which would have grandfathered me in underneath the executive order from our attorney general. There's still that idea of, okay, what is the government going to come in and ultimately decide what right is it going to decide to take away? Right.
And it seems like they just keep breaking norms and just doing whatever they want to. That's really scary.
Yeah.
When the government is just kind of doing whatever they want,
Yeah. And, people always talk about it being somewhat like a white nationalist state, and it feels like that because it feels like, okay, if you're not going to follow this rule, then we're going to kick you out of our country, or we're going to throw you in jail, or we're going to do something to punish you.
Right, because it's not only just the denial of services, it's also criminalizing.
Yeah.
In some cases, totally.
And so that's I don't know, that just is a fear, and I fear not only for myself, but I fear for like my doctors who are brave enough to say, okay, I'm going to give this life-changing medicine to my patients because this is the oath that I have taken. Right. This is the mission I feel called to do. Right. And yet they could be criminalized for doing that.
Yeah.
And so, not only because, I can not easily, because as you've said, I'm established.
Yeah. And this is your home.
Yeah. I could pick up and
move.
You're from
here. You're from Kansas. Yeah.
Yeah. But I can pick up and move where, like, my doctors, if this is where their practice is at, my electrologist, because I'm looking to have the next phase of my surgery, her and her partner are talking about moving out of Kansas City, right, because she happens to be a trans woman, and so
it's like these dominoes that fall,
and so I think about not only the ramifications of somebody who can pass, and
or has a level of privilege that you do,
and so it has all those different layers of all those other people that it's going to impact, and how it's not only a burden to me, but I feel sometimes they talk about the weight of the world, and it does sometimes feel like the weight of the world, because not only am I fighting for my rights, but I'm fighting for their rights to exist and to do what they want to do, the mission that they feel called to do. And
your doctors.
Yeah, my doctors, and even my electrologist who feels, because her practice is kind of focused on the trans community.
Right.
And so she feels, that feels her calling. And so, to feel like they're going to be discriminated against just because they want to support somebody who has decided to live their full authentic life and to live their happy life.
I didn't even think about that an electrolyst, who is somebody who removes hair, would even impact them. I didn't even think about that. That's so interesting. Wow.
So as far as my future, I see it staying in Kansas City. I do have surgeries that I'm looking towards.
Okay.
So those
are already scheduled, and
one is scheduled for this summer, and the one's being scheduled for next summer. So those are on my horizon, and I'm like, okay, once I have these surgeries, then what? Because then I won't. the only lifeline, if you would say, would be testosterone. Well, I can go to doctors in other states that are supportive and find a doctor that would prescribe me testosterone, or I can get on the internet now and find pharmacies that will fulfill.
Yeah. But also, there may be some limitations around that as well.
Yeah. So,
I know that right now they're pulling back on telehealth.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of an emergency measure for COVID, but now they're, kind of pulling back on that.
Yeah.
And that's important for a lot of trans people and also people living rurally.
Yeah. And, you're talking about finances. I'm talking about I have a job. I have
You have a
insurance.
career, not just a job. You have a career.
Yeah. So I have insurance. I am ultimately, if you want to look at privileged people, I am a privileged person, even though economically I may not be as privileged as other people.
Right. You're not rich.
Yeah. I have a career. I have insurance.
Yeah.
I have doctors that are going to support me. I can do these things.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who Medicaid. Yeah. They've taken the Medicaid.
Right.
That was part of the executive order from the Attorney General. It was going to remove Medicaid funding.
Right.
And
to the most vulnerable people, the people who cannot afford health care, we're going to yank it from them.
And that and that was included.
A lot of disabled people are in there too.
Yeah. And it was included in the bill that the legislature passed. So if there's
how shameful. That's so shameful.
A trans person out there living on Medicaid.
Yeah.
Their health care is now non-existent.
Right.
And so, it's like, how do I continue to live in a state, support a state by taxes, support a legislature by my taxes, and, live in a state that's discriminating against so many of my brothers and my sisters.
Yeah.
And so that feels.
I know it's a hard thing because some people who are very much hardcore activists are like, I'm gonna stick. Yeah. I'm gonna be here to the last moment. But for most people, that is not how they can live their lives.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, oftentimes activists kind of sacrifice their own well-being.
Yeah.
And it's a calling. It's a calling, just like pastoral work is a calling. So bless all the activists out there.
Yes.
Even though you think that
you.
they're super wild and stuff, they're doing some good work.
Yeah.
And then there's people who just can't do it economically as well.
Yeah. So that's part of my future plans of, okay, how long do I want to stay? How long do I want to fight?
Yes.
Am I getting old enough into my life that, okay, all I really want to do is live out my golden years.
Right. And you are older.
Yeah.
And you've been through a lot.
Yeah. So my present plan is, and the people at school know my plan is to teach for about 5 more years.
Yeah.
After that.
Will you be vested by then, or?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah.
Awesome.
So
that means a pension, by the way.
Yeah. And actually, I'm already, because I was 17 years as a para and I've been 5 years as a teacher.
Excellent.
So I'm really kind of already vested.
All right.
So pension is there.
Awesome.
And I've got to, if the United Methodist Church doesn't screw everything up, I do have a fantastic pension through them still,
great.
Because I'm still ordained. I've never given my credentials back.
Excellent.
So I still have a very substantial slush fund over there, if you would.
No, you earned that slush fund.
It won't last very long because it's not that huge, but
you earned it. I mean, you earned it. I wish more people had the opportunity to have pensions.
Yeah. So again, that's another privilege on top of what I am already living a somewhat privileged life.
Right.
And so that's what I look towards doing. You asked me off air about, do I miss home?
Yes, the farming community.
Missing the farming community. Mm-hmm. I absolutely do. I hate the fact I live in Kansas City and I can't see the stars at night.
Yeah.
Well, I can, but I can't see them in their full magnitude.
That's always that trade-off, right?
Yeah.
To be someplace where there's more economic opportunity, more safety, more medical care, but then you miss the land and where you grew up. Yeah, totally.
And so that's why I do the tilling of the soil, the messing in the ground, because it does.
Yes.
It still
I know.
It keeps me there.
I know. He's making this water feature out here, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of stones there. Now I get it. Okay.
Yeah. So,
it's your little mini farm here.
Yeah, it is.
All right.
So, I think ultimately, somewhere down the road, my wife and I had always talked about when we retire that we would get some sort of a camper or something like that and just travel around the United States. That's always still kind of a dream.
Sure.
Don't know how.
And, if you find a few acres, you can park it there.
Yeah. The tiny homes always seem alluring. One of my ultimate dreams, and I wish I could figure out how to go about doing this, is really creating a trans tiny home community.
You could do that
in Kansas City.
You could totally do that
and particularly for our vulnerable youth.
Yeah.
And so I that just seems that's something that weighs on my heart. Like, okay, these kids who don't have loving, accepting parents and get kicked out. Yeah. They could come because we have a tiny vet community of homeless vets that this guy created in Kansas City. And I'm like, well, if he can do it for veterans, why can't I do it for my community? Yeah. And so that's...
And you're talking about stable housing, not just transitional housing.
Yeah. So it would be like a tiny home. They would get their tiny home. They could live there for as long as they needed to live there, and if they could purchase it, if they wanted to purchase it. And
yeah, totally.
So
yeah, I've met several people around the country who are starting LGBT-focused homeless shelters. Yeah. So this is kind of an extension of that kind of idea. Yeah. And then also beyond that, there's also people who are forming like intentional communities rurally. Yeah. As well. Yeah. I would love to interview somebody like that, by the way. Oh, it's very hard to get contact with them because they want to be left alone.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course.
But I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
I love you.
Yeah. And that's what's funny is that's kind of the community that my electrologist would love to establish.
Okay, yeah.
Because she actually owns some land and she would love to create a commune type area for our trans community.
Well, that really is our future too. If we really look at the long trajectory, we really have to share more. Yeah. We have to work together in a more loving way, just as a species and society, and especially here in America, we just don't want to work together. It's like we think of it as a weakness or something. Yeah. You know, but every person on the planet has needed help at some point. Yeah. You know, it's like we're not humble about that. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing that, growing up on a farm, I learned from early on, if there was ever an illness on a nearby farmer's land, maybe the farmer had gotten ill and he couldn't harvest his crop. Or like my dad, when he passed away, there were guys that came out and told my mom, hey, I'll help you take care of the cows. That is the very rural, communal type thing that we have.
We do. It's part of the culture. We've just like forgotten it or something. Yeah. Yeah. My great aunts and uncles up in they're Norwegian and they were up in Minnesota, and a very harsh climate up there, but very rich soil, and they were farmers, and they worked the soil into their late 80s even, active farming. They shared equipment. Yeah. It was just like their cultural value. We're not going to buy our own separate combine or whatever. We're going to share it. And we're going to help each other bring that crop in. Yeah. Because it's the community's crop. It's not just that farm and that farm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'd be fantastic. Yeah. Like I said, that's kind of, and my present therapist is like, I think you should figure out how to do that.
Yeah. And you have the background and the skills. Yeah. Yeah. So, there's some people in cities who've grown up in cities who want to do these things, but then they don't have those kinds of skills. Yeah. But then they have other skills, like maybe they're a nurse or, something like that. They have legal skills. They've studied the law. So, there's, it takes a community, as they say.
Yeah. So that ultimately, I guess that's my long-term plans.
Yeah. So some of it is bittersweet. Yeah. Like maybe having to move or choosing in that. Maybe some guilt around privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's a heavy thing.
Yeah.
But then also trying out something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I guess that's what I learned as a pastor in the United Methodist Church. You're never guaranteed an appointment. So it's always a year-by-year appointment.
Yeah.
So you never knew when you were going to move. So you were always be off to the next adventure.
Academia is also like that. It's very unstable like that.
So
anyway, thank you so much. I think that's a good place to end, on community and possible change, but also maybe growth,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for meeting with me today and inviting me in your house. And, my dog was very excited, and so were the other little dogs. So hopefully I will be able to get in there and scratch some of them. There was a little bit of excitement earlier.
Yeah. Maybe Franklin's calmed down a little bit.
That's the giant dachshund.
Yeah.
The troublemaker.
Yeah.
Oh, those dogs.
Yeah.
I what I heard was that they were bred to control badgers.
Yep.
And you could definitely see them in some of their behavior.
Yep. They're badger dogs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fearless.
Yep.
Fearless. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So nice.
Thank
to meet
you. I can't remember who put it out on Facebook about you traveling through, but I'm glad I made that connection and we were able to.
Yeah, I actually, the response has been great.
Good.
Yeah, I have basically 2 a day for the next couple weeks. Unfortunately, somebody did cancel today, and I'm just gonna I'll put it as part of this video. They were a parent who contacted me. I didn't contact them. They contacted me, and they have a trans son who's a teenager. And at the last moment, they decided for privacy and safety reasons that it wouldn't be a good idea. Yeah. Even though I take privacy very seriously, and people don't have to share personal information. People can say anything. They don't have to share their name or their location. I can pixelate them. You're very open, which I appreciate. But I also appreciate people who are stealth and who don't want to be public. But, I also respect people if they don't want to talk to me. It's a scary time we're in. It's a scary time. Yeah. So
and that has been the other privilege I've had. I have an administration at my school that is supportive.
And good on them for supporting their employees.
Yay. Yay, Builton Middle School.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's stop because otherwise we're just going to keep going here.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Yeah, it's so hard to stop.